Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marco, and I'm here to discuss with you Chapter 7.3 and 7.4. 7.3 goes over music, and 7.4 is titled Sports as Media Entertainment. So jumping right into this, 7.3.1, the first section is titled Transformative Effects on Culture. So music... in this section, it basically talks about how music originally began as something used during, say, theater performances or drama performances, on stage acting, as a means to just tell a story, as a means to add emotions and feelings to these dramas, to these theater performances that were going on. And nowadays, it's progressed to something more as music is used more for advertisement purposes. It's used to associate with, say, a brand or, say, an item that's trying to be sold by companies. For example, the textbook uses McDonald's, I'm loving it, as one example, or insurance companies such as Nationwide is on your side. All these jingles and music is used to associate with some product that customers are going to remember simply because of the music. It just sticks with your head. It sticks in your head like that. So moving on to the next section, Rockabilly Revolution. 7.3.2 touches on the American folklore and the origins of music here in the United States, at least. Historians trace the origins of music back to two main categories. The first being black music, which you could probably guess originates back when slavery was still going on in this country, and African Americans were using music to try to escape their impossibly difficult lives as a means to tell a story of their day-to-day living in a way that hopefully one day would be passed on to the next generation so that nobody forgets the troubles that they went through. And then the next origin of American music is country and western, also known as hillbilly music. That's right, hillbilly music. I'm not making this up. It's on page 126 of the book. Hillbilly music focused more on poverty, relationships, and then challenges, family challenges, to be more precise. And then the section mentions that eventually these two origins, these two types of music, were spreading nationwide, especially after the Civil War and slavery ended. Black music started to spread and gather a white audience, whereas country music or hillbilly music continued to just dominate. But eventually the two would merge into rock and roll. So moving on to the next section that covers rock and roll. Basically, it's very short, and it discusses how in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, Elvis Presley, which I'm sure everybody knows about and has heard his music, Elvis Presley became, and I quote, the white boy who could sing colored. So he was, again, used as a way of not only spreading black music so that African Americans could now have credit for the music that they created. They can now use it to market toward more people. And that you'll see that's a recurring theme in these two sections that I'm going over. Music and sports are used now more for marketing, for campaigning, and less for entertainment, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. Next section is titled Music of Descent, which is music transitioned from the rock and roll Elvis Presley era to more of a means or a medium to express things like political views, religious views, rights movement. All these things started to take place, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. For example, before any of us were born, music was used to discuss anti-war against the Vietnam War, and this eventually would also help the civil rights movements for blacks, for all minorities, for women, and so forth. So this section discusses how music transitioned from more entertainment to more political, religious, and rights movements. And then this continued even as recently as the 1980s and 1990s with the next section that discusses rise of rap music. And essentially this section, to summarize it, rap music became in the 80s and 90s and currently what rock and roll was in the early 20th century. Again, just a means of just expressing political views and agendas, religious views, and so forth. And that really does sum up basically how music is used to communicate with the masses. How music is not, it's typically still used for entertainment purposes. You know, you pick a song that you like to hear, but it's still almost very common to listen to a song that has some underlying tone, whether it be related to religion, whether it be related to politics, and so forth. Moving into the next section, 7.4, sports as a mass media entertainment. Like I said a couple minutes ago, you're going to notice that in this section in the textbook, you quickly realize sports nowadays especially is used more as a means to get views for cable companies, for television providers. It's used more as a means to throw in advertisement and commercials by these companies who are just trying to sell you products. So sports, again, is very entertaining for a lot of people to watch. But in order to do so, you have to deal with all the commercials that come in between, all the ads that are always just popping up everywhere, even on your cell phone. You know, it's very common to be on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or all these social media platforms or YouTube, Netflix, and so forth. And there's always a commercial that you have to listen to. There's always some ad that you have to wait a few seconds to skip. And you notice that correlation kind of started with sports. The first section, 7.4.1, which is mass audience for sports, discusses that as early as the 19th century, people were starting to get more interested in sports. Boxing, baseball, racing, golf, these things were way more popular 100, 200 years ago than maybe they are now. So audiences were drawn, again, for the entertainment purposes, but like always, newspaper writers, eventually radio providers, and then eventually cable providers realized the amount of money that could be made by these sporting events, by televising these sporting events, putting them on radio, paying so that you have to watch them. And then that transitions into the next section, that the audience and advertisement basically took off, right? This section uses the Super Bowl as a huge example, which the recording of this video is actually the day after the 2019 Super Bowl. So it hits home very well, because the entire Super Bowl is basically one huge advertisement, whether it be for shoes or sponsors, supplements, beer. Bud Light is huge currently, right? So this section discusses that the Super Bowl cable providers pay billions and billions of dollars to be able to show the Super Bowl on their channels, and that companies spend billions and billions of dollars to advertise their products during the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl is the most watched event in the United States for one particular day. The only event probably bigger, and it actually is bigger in the book, it mentions it, the World Cup is the only event that for 1 month straight, has a larger viewing than the Super Bowl itself. So the next section goes into televised sports. And this section can be summarized basically in one quote on page 127. Sports has become recognized as a lost leader, something that is offered below its retail value because it attracts customers for other goods and services. So in other words, like I just said, sports now is used more for marketing, more for trying to gain money, not so much for entertainment purposes. You don't watch sports now for its entertainment value. You typically will turn on a TV, at least most viewers turn on their TV, turn on a sports channel, and are more likely to watch commercials and advertisements and pay attention to that than the actual game or the sporting event itself. And that actually sums up 7.3 and 7.4. So just to summarize, like the music in sports, while still entertaining in its own right, has been used now for the last who knows how long, for a century or more, for, again, advertisement, for trying to make money. It's all about profit. Everything's always about profit. So and that was probably the most interesting thing that I learned in this chapter, was the amount of money that companies actually pay in order to show these sporting events on TV. And it's, again, billions and billions of dollars. So then 2 questions I have for the class to keep you guys thinking is, Have you, as a viewer, ever actually bought something from either listening to a song, listening to music, or while watching some sporting event, saw some advertisement, and have you actually bought something because of that particular sales pitch, more or less? Second question, how much news do you actually learn about from watching sport channels or from listening to music? So those are my two questions. That's my chapter. Thank you, and I hope it helps.